Hey everybody, this is a piece from May 1995 called "The Perspective of the Long Haul" by Ray Challinor. This piece has been, this was originally in Workers' Liberty uh, newspaper. Um, I'm not really actually sure what it's about, but I've seen it referenced a couple times in different bibliographies, and I think it tells, I don't really know, but it's in Workers' Liberty, so you can kind of guess what it's probably some of the things it's probably about. I think it's about the British left and the history of it. Anywho, let's get started. I was involved with the organization from the first meeting. If I remember correctly, that was October 1950. There were 34 members, but that really exaggerates the size of the organization. A number of the members had been in the Open Party faction of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. That is, they did not want the RCP to fold up and were really burnt out. These people quickly dropped out. The RCP was the I don't know if it was the only, but it was like one of the main, at least one of the main Trotskyist parties in the UK in the period immediately following World War II. Um, so, our biggest branch was Birmingham with 6 members. I lived in Crewe and was associated with the Manchester branch. I had been convinced for some time that Russia was not socialist and not, as the Trotskyists said, a workers' state. I accepted the theory of state capitalism and had put the idea forward in an article which appeared in Left, a socialist discussion journal, in June 1948. There were articles produced before then putting the state capitalist point of view. The first I had seen is in Peter Petrov's book, The Secrets of Hitler's Victory, produced in 1934. Petrov was a veteran revolutionary, wounded in the 1905 revolution and subsequently a leading official in the Soviet government. When he fell out with Stalin in the 1920s, he went to live in Germany where he experienced the betrayal of Stalinism and reformism firsthand. He developed his theory of state capitalism on the basis of his close knowledge of both the Russian state and Comintern. Dr. R.D. Worrell, a pioneer of British Trotskyism, wrote an article in Left in 1940 on the same theme. I have an obituary that I just read for Ryan Worrell, but I think maybe it's a different person. It says Dr. R.D. Worrell, but he might be speaking of R.L. Worrell, Ryan L. Worrell, which is, I think, the actual name, but I'm not sure. Maybe he's speaking of someone different. But Ryan L. Worrell was someone who put the state cap was one of the early people within the Trotskyist milieu to put forward a state capitalist theory against Trotsky's degenerated worker state theory. Anyway, Cliff's book on state capitalism appeared in its original form in the Revolutionary Communist Party's internal bulletin in 1948, so these ideas were being discussed. I first met Cliff in December 1947 at a meeting of the Thames Valley RCP. We basically agreed on the theory of state capitalism. Our difference was that Cliff believed it was important to argue the case inside the Trotskyist movement. Cliff believed it would be possible to convince them of the theory, and, in fact, at the time people like Jock Haston were toying with the idea. I disagreed with Cliff because the Trotskyists were so dogmatic. Their workers' state theory was the Ark of the Covenant, and they were not about to abandon it. I thought that a new generation with new ideas would have to emerge from outside Trotskyism. I think Cliff's theory emerged in response to what he saw as the failures of Trotskyism. Remember that Trotsky had predicted that the Second World War would lead to either workers' revolution or the degeneration of the working class. And that had led James P. Cannon in 1945 to claim the war had not ended. The orthodox Trotskyists, with their rigid dogma, could not accept that the great man's predictions had been wrong. In the U.S., the Johnson-Forrest tendency, CLR James and Raya Dunayevskaya, grappled with the lunacies of the Trotskyist position. They produced a lot of material developing the theory of state capitalism. I had a letter from Raya saying that she met Cliff in 1946 at the Fourth World Congress. They agreed she would devote her time to study the philosophical implications and that Cliff would look at the economic issues. When the Red Army went into Eastern Europe and murdered large numbers of socialists and smashed their organizations, the Communist Party said that socialism was being built, and the Trotskyists said that worker states had been formed. This is all very difficult to come to terms with if you believe that the workers can only come to power when the working class is consciously in favor of socialism and fighting for it. The theory of state capitalism was central to understanding what was happening in the world. Cliff was absolutely correct in the economic assessment of post-war Britain. The Fourth International believed that there would be a slump. Cliff, backed by the RCP majority faction, advanced the theory of the permanent war economy. In a semi-Keynesian way, though through vast military expenditure, capitalism could avoid crises of overproduction, at least in the short run. This was denied by individuals such as Mandel, which is Ernest Mandel, and Grant. I believe that's Ted Grant. Who's like the Ted Grant was like the guy who's like the initiator or whatever of like in defense of Marxism people, like what's his name? Is it Alan Wood or Alan Woods? Can't remember what their organization is called. I don't know if it's the International Marxist Tendency. I'm not sure. Anyway, Healy compounded the error by backbreaking activism. Cliff played a useful role of standing up to problem Trotskyist organizations, particularly those associated with Jerry Healy, have always had. The idea that the revolution was just around the corner. The Trotskyists did not have the perspective of the long haul. They wore people out. It was like trying to run a marathon as if it were a 100 meters race. And the problem with the Trotskyists was not just a capitulation to Stalinism. They capitulated to reformism too. Just before the breakup of the RCP, Jock Haston came to stay with me in Crewe. Haston argued that the Labour government, which had nationalized 20% of the economy, was transforming Britain towards a socialist society. I thought this was nonsense. The same relations at the point of production still existed in the nationalized industries. Haston went over to reformism and subsequently became education officer of the right-wing union, the ETU. But even Healy made concessions. Healy's paper, Socialist Outlook, claimed that the Bevonites, quote, gave the lead the workers want, end quote. Healy even said that the only thing wrong with labor was its foreign policy. We had no illusions in people like Bevan. Tony Cliff has made a very useful contribution over many years to the socialist tradition. If I have any criticism of Cliff, is that in factional fighting there are no holds barred. For example, in the late 60s, Tony Cliff brought into IS a group called Workers' Fight around Sean Matgamna. Sean Matgamna is like the initiator of or one of the initiators at least, of the Alliance for Workers' Liberty in Britain. Cliff did this to deal with the libertarian wing of the organization, which people like Sedgwick and myself were associated. There were a whole series of events like this, and it seems from his view of the Bolshevik model of the party as the be-all and end-all of socialist organization. But the problems which face us in Britain are not the same as those which confronted Lenin in Russia in 1917. Capitalism has changed since 1917, and Lenin's old formula cannot be applied mechanically. The end.